Welcome to the Lost Previews, where we talk about the preview chapters of The Lost Metal, Book 4 of Mistborn Era 2. Today we're going to be talking about chapters 12 and 13, but first, my name is Danielle, also known as Fel Candy, and with me is Marvin.
Hi, I'm Felio.
We do need to make a little mention that there will most definitely be some spoiler talk about the Stormlight Archive, specifically in Rhythm of War. So if you haven't read up to that point, or if you don't want to get spoiled for that, then we're just letting you know ahead of time.
Yeah.
Let's just dig right into chapter 12 if you want to do a summary for us.
Yeah, sure. So chapter 12 is our first proper Wayne chapter. We had the prologue, but the first main Wayne chapter. And we continue on from last time. He sits down with Milan to have this conversation she wanted to have with him. And yeah, she explains that she specifically requested the mission to go off-world, and she basically should never have started the relationship with Wayne because all the other Kandra advised her not to do it. And yeah, she breaks up with him, and Wayne doesn't take it that well, internally at least. Like, he makes a good facade and pretends like he deals with it well, but he doesn't. And they share a final kiss, and she leaves him alone after telling him that he was her best slay ever. So yeah, and the chapter ends with Wayne thinking he's worthless, and this go through this entire chapter, sort of this sentiment that it's his fault. And yeah, so what were your thoughts?
Yeah, Wayne definitely has some abandonment issues.
Big time, yeah.
Starting just from the beginning, even with his father not being in the picture and his mother dying, and now I don't know if this is like his first like real relationship or what, but
Probably.
they had something for many years. I mean, 6 years is a long time. And for her to kind of admit that she was leading him on is a little hard to take. I don't want to say I lost respect for her, but I don't like it when people know that they're doing something wrong and they do it anyway just because they,
Yeah, agreed. And it's also sad because they did make for a generally great couple, I feel like. And so seeing this, that from Milan's side, it always has been sort of like she was fully aware that this could never become anything really serious to her, and that she still did it is, yeah, that definitely can understand Wayne being upset about it.
Yeah, for sure. I was expecting her to invite him along.
Yeah, I could have seen that as well, yeah.
I mean, because she was mentioning that, they were really good together. They got along really well, and she didn't mind being with him, but she just wanted to go and explore more. But I don't know why she didn't, suggest maybe you can come with me, but maybe he can't.
Maybe that, and maybe it's also that she finally just accepted that it won't work out between them the two of them, and she decided, okay, she needs to put a cut there, and it's sort of the perfect opportunity, I guess, that she's now going off-world. But I mean, she also specifically requested it, so she has been planning this for a little while. Yeah.
Or she could be using it like as an excuse to break things off.
Yeah.
Like saying, a harmony is sending us out, and so I've got to go.
Yeah.
It's not you, it's me.
I'm an immortal being, and it just doesn't work out. Yeah. Speaking about her mission and being sent off-world, she reveals that she's the first one to be sent off-world. So it's not even like Harmony has been doing this for a little while or has started it already. She is the first one to go. So that's pretty interesting, I think.
Is this the first time that Shadesmar has been mentioned in Mistborn?
I think
like name dropped?
At least in the main books. It might have been named in Secret History.
Yeah, so she mentions she gets to cross the misted unknown, the dark vastness that Harmony calls Shadesmar. I'll be the first Kandra to go out there long term with an official mission. So there have been others out there, I think. I think that's what that's implying, is that they have like ventured out, but
Maybe,
they don't
yeah.
actually have any missions to go. They were just maybe it was like testing it to see like the traveling through there or
Maybe, yeah.
something. I'm wondering who she's mentioning when she says that she's not just going to help a couple of people, she's going to help whole peoples,
Yeah.
I don't know who Harmony is sending her out to, but
I assume she'd go to. I guess so. We know that Threnody seems to be pretty close to Scadrial in the cognitive. Then, of course, Cell is pretty close because you have the Irie Fortress that's sort of close to Scadrial. And we have, I think, Shadesmar proper, like the Rosha, is pretty close as well because we have this expanse of the Vapors on the Shadesmar map, on the official one. So one of those three probably is where where Harmony sent her to.
I just want to know where not necessarily battlefield, but where all the action is happening there, who is she going to go and help? So an entire civilization.
Yeah. At this point, like, we know by now that this takes place after Stormlight Archive 5. So it's, I mean, I don't want to assume what happens, or I don't want to speculate too much about what happens in Stormlight Archive 5, but it's not unlikely that things are going downhill, and those, like the Rosharans, might be the ones who are most in need of help.
So I think it's safe to assume that this is going to be maybe the last time that we see Milan.
At least in Mistborn.
In Mistborn, or maybe at least in Mistborn era 2, or at least definitely in this book. It feels like she's not going to be coming back. This is like her goodbye.
Agreed, yeah. But I feel like we have to look out for her in other books.
Yeah, look out for that emerald skeleton. It's also interesting they mentioned that she was bringing an aluminum skeleton. Do we even know what the aluminum skeleton is for? Is it just maybe something that's elementically not able to be affected? But
yeah, and probably just in general resistance to magic. I guess it's interesting because doesn't it, or wouldn't it also somehow interfere with the spikes that they need to even be conscious? But I guess it works out somehow.
And I think it was mentioned actually in the broadsheet in a previous episode that we went over, where they had an aluminum like dinosaur skeleton or something. So that'd be an interesting thing to theorize about.
Definitely, yeah. I think that's about it from me for this chapter. Like, I do feel bad for Wayne. Like, I pity him, but yeah.
It was a very short chapter. It was really just to let the audience know where Milan is going and where Wayne is in his headspace, lonely, basically, and feeling worthless. So we'll move on to chapter 13. So for the summary for chapter 13, we're with Wax and Steris in his basement lair of a lab, and he takes them down there, and Steris gets her goggles on, and Wax is suiting up, and Marcy is watching them and says they're so cute. And they are performing some tests on the Trellium spike that she brought to them. They're testing its melting point, where they heat it up and they do a bunch of different electrical tests with it. They're testing its hardness, and then they perform a spectroscopy on like a metal flake off of the spike. And Marcy is telling them what the cycle that she pulled the spike from is saying in his last moments, and mentioned that it was similar to Miles. And during the spectroscopy, it shows this abnormal amount of red color showing up on his graph, and then they're testing it in a safe box that is supposed to protect them from explosions with acids. And Marcy is looking at Wax's notes as the tests are going on and notices that he's trying to split harmonium into its base metals. And Steris mentions at the very end that it is reacting, the trellium spike is reacting to et metal. So lots of science in this chapter.
yeah. So much science. And also regarding the end of this chapter, why did it, I know this happens in books in general, that you have these cliffhangers, but these seem so perfect for preview consumption. It's fascinating how Brandon or how Thor schedules them, so we always get a really nice cliffhanger.
I know one of the other chapters, they cut it off in the middle just to have a breaking point. I'm hoping that that's what this is, so it doesn't go off into another point of view or something.
Yeah. I feel like it can't be. We have to go on because everyone is together. So unless it's another Wayne chapter next up, we better get an answer right away. Yeah.
Let's talk about a little bit of the science that's going on. He mentioned spectroscopy, which I found really interesting. I don't know when spectroscopy was invented or discovered as a study of splitting wavelengths of light, I believe. But it seems very advanced for this culture since they don't have TVs or anything even. So
I think it's like 19th century technology as well, like for us, like at least the spectroscopy of materials on Earth. Like we can also perform spectrometry or something on stars and stuff, but that's another story, I think. And yeah, but in general, he also mentions electrolysis and electroplating as stuff that he can do. And they have this sort of electric melting thing that they use. So they have gotten quite advanced in their technology. I feel like that's pretty much our state of advancement at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. So yeah, they are at that point in time, I feel like.
Makes you wonder how much of it is nudges from Harmony or nudges from the Khandra, giving them information to kind of push them in the right direction without actually interfering.
Yeah. Probably I think he stopped doing it so much because in one of the epigraphs, when he talks to Wax, he thinks about how they've just now gotten electricity while the Southerners are doing much better already in other regards. So probably thinks, or his new stance is to not interfere too much. And it's also getting worse with his intense fighting against each other, driving him towards inaction rather than action. But yeah, they definitely are now at the stage where they say, okay, they can do some serious science here. And that's pretty cool to see.
I mentioned earlier in the episode that there were going to be some Rhythm of War spoilers, and that is because, pause, in Rhythm of War, we have a very good science side story going on with the Navani, and a lot of the science kind of mirrors the science that's going on in here. They're doing wavelengths of sound, and here it's about light, because they're mentioning that the trellium spike has an abnormal amount of red on the spectrum that's more than even their measurements can go, than their graph can go.
And in Rhythm of War, we also have this when when Navani getting my I ending names mixed up. When Navani splits, or she directs the void light or stormlight as well through a prism, and it splits up into a spectrum. And she also, I think, gets a full spectrum, which has a wider violet band, or like this sort of Stygian blue color. And this is basically the same thing we are seeing here with the wider red band, or at least this graph that indicates it's a lot more in the red. So this, as Rex also talks about, basically confirms that it's a god metal. So, I mean, we basically knew this already, but it's nice to have confirmation, yeah.
It makes me wonder if it's going into like the infrared spectrum, like side of visible light, if there's something going on there. But the red color is everywhere in the Cosmere now. It's an indicator of something, like when the cycle's eyes glowed red, or the red that's in the sky, or now we see the red on this metal.
Generally in the Cosmere, red is an indicator of sort of corruption going on, and another one shard's power being co-opted by another. So this makes me wonder, is Trell just naturally red, or is this fully, or is not even Trellium as such, but corrupted harmonium or another god's metal? So, yeah.
Like maybe someone was experimenting with, since they see that harmonium is possibly an alloy of lerasium and atium. Maybe Trellium has a third element to it, or maybe someone is experimenting with combining metals with another god metal.
Oh yeah, maybe. And yeah, it's just fascinating how they talk about these god metals in general. Like, they talk about them as we would probably talk about materials in our world, and it's so nice to see them also theorizing about how the metals might be, or probably are related to the mists. And then Steris says this thing like, oh, maybe they don't behave the same way our normal matter behaves, with like where the state of matter depends on the temperature and rather on something else. I don't know, it's just so cool to see them experimenting with this.
Oh, yeah. When they were mentioning they can't get it to melt, so let's burn it. And didn't they say something about how the mists were a gaseous form of a god metal, and they're trying to possibly turn this into a gaseous form? Yeah. But because it can't heat up, I guess.
Yeah.
They're positing that there's another way to transform the state of matter for each metal. Maybe there's a liquid form and a solid form and a gaseous form, but there's something else that changes them between them.
That was pretty interesting as well to me, because Marasi talks about how, I got this from the cycle and it's probably charged, but we know that charged or invested items behave differently physically as well from, on maybe not necessarily physically, but metaphysically. When affected, they can't be easily affected by magic as well. So they don't quite make the connection yet here, I feel like. They talk about it, but they don't say, okay, maybe it's not melting because it's invested. I could definitely see that being the case, that something is like pushing against it, changing its face. We can only speculate at this point as well, I feel like, but it's definitely cool to see all this sort of magitech or magic science coming into this book as well now.
Yeah. That's probably, that's a huge theme in Era 2, is about the progress of technology and the mysticism of the early era Mistborn stories. So it's very interesting. And I liked how they were comparing it, because they do have harmonium, which is another god metal. And so they're comparing its behavior to harmonium. So harmonium is known to explode in the presence of water. And they mentioned you have to transport it in oil, because it can even react with air, which is probably the water molecules in air. And Trellium is not acting this way. They put it into the safe cube or whatever, the box, to do their experiments with it, and it wasn't really exploding like harmonium is. So I'm wondering if maybe harmonium, because it's a combination of two metals, that it's very unstable for that reason, because they're opposites and they're being alloyed together. Yeah,
I'm not sure if we have WOPs on this exactly, but it's, I think, a common theory. That the weird thing, of course, also is that we have WOPs on the fact that it's not a simple alloy of lerasium atium. It's something more, something different, because it's also in that harmony isn't a straight up mix of the shards, but he's a new shard that combines the two. So Ed metal harmonium is similarly not an alloy of or just a simple mix, but a new thing. But there might be ways, according to Brandon, to split it regardless. So we have no clue what that might be, but maybe Wax is going to find it out, and that's how we get the lost metal, because he does actually recover it from Harmonium. I don't know. Yeah.
That's very interesting. So when they've talked about atoms or axons, maybe this Harmonium is not a molecule of like an ionic bond between the two metals, but maybe it's a brand new element. Ah, okay.
Yeah, that's basically the idea of it.
That's basically what it's saying.
Yeah, because they are weird anyway, because they are made of the raw investiture again. So how does that transfer to atoms or Xe? I don't know. Yeah, but what I found interesting is when they did spectroscopy on the Harmonium, he mentions that it also has a full spectrum, but he doesn't mention any colors standing out, I think. So
he did mention that there was something different about Harmonium, but he didn't mention what it was, like if it was the red spectrum or maybe it was a different color in the visible spectrum or something.
Yeah. So because I do wonder what that is, because like in my mind it could be that we have two spikes sort of in the spectrum, because it's essentially two shards coming together. So maybe it behaves differently in that way, but definitely more to be discussed and discovered there.
It's interesting because when you think about like an atom bomb, that's basically what Wax is attempting to do. I mean, but instead of, because Marcy even mentioned that, you're trying to recover these two separate metals, these two separate god metals, instead of focusing on creating the airship technology, which all the other scientists are doing. And he was, I know he was later on thinking, I don't have that much time with this Trillium spike because I have to give it to the real scientist, which also very reminiscent of Navani and Rhythm of War. I loved the science in Rhythm of War, so this makes me extremely excited for this book.
Oh yeah. And I mean, it's only going to get more spicy from here, from the
of course,
all the Cosmere aspects and the science aspects. So I mean, I was excited to read this book before, but now I'm invested in this and want to find out all the things that are happening. Yeah,
you're capital I invested.
Yeah. Another science aspect that they sort of touch on, because they also test its hardness. This was just something I noticed. They try to scratch it with diamond, and then they try to scratch corundum with it. And this actually is exactly how a scale of hardness works in real life as well, the Mohs scale, which also goes from 1 to 10. So corundum is 9 and diamond is 10 on that. So it makes sense that it's a little over 9 trillium. But I don't like about that it's not a scale from 1 to 16, because we're on Scadwell, and of course everything should go from 1 to 16. But yeah, just a little detail I noticed.
I mean, maybe it is. Maybe they use different metals in their test. So the corundum, it was not able to scratch, or it was able to scratch the corundum, but not the diamond.
Yeah, I think the diamond scratched the trillium spike, but the spike was only barely able to scratch the corundum, so it's in between those two from the hardness scale. Yeah.
And it's interesting that, as he mentions the hardness of it, but that it's brittle, because Harmonium is pliable like gold, he mentioned. So it's very interesting. How do they test how brittle a metal is?
That I have no clue.
Maybe it has something to do with the melting point, because the gold, as you heat it up, it's able to be formed.
For Harmonium, we know that it's basically a supercesium in the way it works. So it's in this first period of the periodic table. And so like, lithium, sodium, it behaves like these metals. And those all are pretty soft, I think, because of something. Chemistry, material sciences.
I'm not a chemist.
Yeah, so, but some of their properties determine that they are pretty soft, I think, this entire period. And that's why harmonium sort of fits in there, but yeah, I have no clue how. I guess you just hit it with a hammer and see if it deforms or if it's breaking up. I don't know how they would test it.
I mean, he's thinking to himself, how am I going to turn this into an earring? And I mean, obviously someone is able to turn it into things because it's made into a spike. So there is a way to shape it.
Yeah.
And he was able to cut off a little flake of it. So maybe that has something to do with the brittleness. Maybe you carve it instead of melt it down. Or
maybe, yeah. I don't know. So generally metals, like, it's weird that it doesn't get softer at all as it heats up, because metals generally do when they start turning liquid, but maybe it just has such a high melting point, maybe due to the investiture, maybe due to something else, that it just takes it up to, I don't know, a couple thousand degrees instead of 1,000 that you usually need. Yeah.
Well, it was at 2,500 degrees.
Something like that, yeah.
They mentioned that.
Yeah.
Speaking of the earring, there is a little tiny paragraph in this chapter where he mentions that he didn't even know if the envelope with the metal was from Harmony.
Oh, yeah, right.
So.
I already forgot that again, but yeah, that's interesting. That it could come from anyone, really.
Yeah, so he did mention that he was going to have to talk to Harmony before he actually, I mean, that would be smart before he puts a spike of trellium into his ear.
Yep, that would be
probably not
smart.
the best idea.
Definitely, yeah. One final thing about the trellium or these spikes in general is that they talk about what the set wants to do with them, or they, Wax at least, theorizes about what the set in general wants to do, and he talks about how, like, they want to build up elemental powers in their people and, I don't know, further them. And he mentions eugenics as one means of doing that, which I think is a reference to all the girls they were kidnapping in Alloy Law, which we haven't heard anything about these girls since Alloy Law. So maybe we'll finally find out what happened to them and if they really try to breed like new elements or more powerful elements.
And then the science is going to a place where he's trying to separate the Lerasium, and we know that creates, first generation level Mistborn. Yeah. So if I'm pretty sure that the lost metal is referring to that, but
it could be anything at this point. It could be something completely different. Could be anything,
but that's what it's pointing to right now. Yeah. It's like, this is the lost metal because they're trying to bring back a Mistborn.
I mean,
a full Mistborn.
It would be interesting in so far that because the way Allomancy works, it sort of becomes more diluted over generations. And by Area 3, we sort of wouldn't have, or we probably still would have native, but natural Allomancers occurring, but they'd be really, really weak, I feel like. So maybe this is a way to for Brandon to sort of inject some, I don't know, new genes into the gene pool again. So yeah, some new power into the population again. Because, I mean, in general, it's the sort of the theme that it progresses and we sort of move away from the relying too much on the magic to more magitech and science. But I feel like the alternative would be that people just do hemalurgy left, right, and center and steal powers of other people to become more powerful themselves. So maybe this is a way for Brandon to say, okay, we'll do a bit of a power injection again, and then we'll see what's going on. Yeah. Just
a last note that I have is the discussion about the cycle's last word and Miles's last words about bringing back the ash falls again, and Wax is like, oh, that's impossible. The tectonic plates aren't even able to do that. And then he mentioned that when Harmony showed Trell's influence to him, even Harmony was shocked by that. And he mentions that their world is only 3.5 centuries old. And there's a lot of things that are much older than that.
Oh, yeah.
And he mentions far, far more crafty. So I just thought that was an interesting to bring it back to what the real conflict is here is Harmony is very worried about Trell and his influence on the world, and that they're kind of like babies. They're the whole world is remade and they don't have all of these, myths and legends around anymore.
Yeah. And maybe that just came to my mind because for the world of Ash to return and everything, we basically need shardic influence for that to happen. So but a shard can really only directly influence a planet that much when they're invested there. So maybe Trell giving them all this Trellium is their way of injecting themselves and investing themselves more in the system, so they have some sort of or some amount of influence there to maybe not directly cause volcanoes to spew up again, but to at least nudge things along and eventually make the planet be more like in the Final Empire again. Yeah.
It just makes me wonder if maybe that's what's going on in Bilming, where Harmony doesn't know, he can't see in there, and maybe that's like Trell's home base where he's working and he's just trying to like drive a spike, pardon the pun, into the land.
Yeah. We will see.
We'll see.
Yep. We'll also see what will happen with the add metal Trellium reaction. Because right now it could be anything.
Yeah, I know. Well, Marcy said that the Trellium spike is kind of almost like magnetic. It has like magnetic properties, right?
Well, yeah, it's repelling other things. So the other spikes. So how does it react to the ammonium? I don't know, because it's another god metal.
What is this reaction between them? Are they like sticking together like magnets, or are they?
Who knows? Or maybe it's
what does this reaction look like?
Yeah. Hopefully we'll find out in the next chapter.
All right. Did you have any other things that you wanted to talk about for chapter 12 or 13?
Nope, that's it from me.
Great. Well, this has been, I almost said I almost said Rhythm of Previews. This has been the Lost Previews, and we are very happy to be talking about these. We're getting very close to the last few chapters of the previews. Please join us on our forums, the 17th Shard Discord, our SoundCloud, YouTube videos, Patreon, anywhere you can talk to us. We want to hear what your thoughts are about these chapters. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.